Welcome to Risky Bitness. For this week's episode, I'll be revisiting Super Castlevania 4's less popular cousin, Castlevania Dracula X. This game was released in 1995, 2 years after Rondo of Blood and 2 years before Symphony of the Night. For the purpose of this video, I played through the Japanese version, Akumajo Dracula XX or Double X. The two versions are almost identical, however the US version censors most of the blood in the game. In order to have the experience closest to the vision of director Koki Yamashita and designer Akihiro Yamada, I chose to go with the uncensored version. This game was also released in Europe as Vampire's Kiss, definitely the coolest of the three titles. So what is Dracula X? Well, on the surface, it's a port of the extremely popular PC Engine CD game Rondo of Blood. However, it doesn't take long after booting this game up to discover that it's an entirely different game. The story is mostly the same, with Richter Belmont venturing to Dracula's castle to rescue his fiancée Annette, here spelled without the E at the end, and her little sister Maria. Maria and Annette are not sisters in Rondo of Blood. Unlike Rondo of Blood, there are only 2 maidens to rescue here, instead of 4. There's also no mention whatsoever of the Dark Priest shaft who is central to the plot of Rondo, except for maybe the shaft that SNES owners got by buying this game instead of Rondo of Blood. This is not where the differences end by any stretch of the imagination, but we'll get to all of that as we move along. On that note, this game is considered a non-canon alternate universe in the official Castlevania timeline. Of course, there are no cutscenes or voice acting, which should be expected given that this would have required a CD-ROM. Instead, we have a much more familiar kind of storytelling sequence, using panels and text to start the game. There's no introductory carriage stage. That was most likely due to the shortage of storage limitations on the cartridge and not being able to reproduce the thunder and rain effects or the animation of the original. Instead, the game begins in the Burning Village. From here, the levels and the maps are completely different from Rondo, with some stages resembling but not copying exactly their Rondo of Blood counterparts. There are 7 levels, and the order of the areas you visit is completely different. The locations of Maria and Annette are completely new. Instead of an entire lower path, there are only levels 4 and 5 having alternate versions. And the bosses have also changed, with quite a number of new bosses added to the game, and a lot of Rondo's bosses moved or omitted entirely. Instead of having a battery save and a stage select, the cartridge uses the tried and true Castlevania password system. This means no going back to try to rescue the girls if you missed them. Once you pass them, you're out of luck, unless you use an old password to go back to an earlier level and try again. This can be tragic, as missing Annette results in a substantial change in the game. Instead of fighting death on the clock tower, you fight Carmilla, who has turned Annette into a vampire. This fight feels a lot like the Shaft boss from Rondo. The level design in this game is pretty bad. I know a lot of you like this game, some even like it better than Super Castlevania 4, which is in my opinion blasphemy. The layout of the stages is illogical and really poorly planned out. There's nowhere near as much rhythm or flow to them as I've come to expect from a Castlevania game, and it's really a shame. It just feels kind of low effort, like they knew that they couldn't possibly replicate Rondo here, and they just didn't even try. Or they tried to make something different, and they just got it wrong. All the way through. You'll also probably notice that the graphics here are a pretty big downgrade from Rondo, in spite of the fact that the SNES has better graphics overall. Everything looks flat and pixelated. It's a huge disappointment. The backgrounds are ugly and washed out. It's a downgrade even from the Super Castlevania 4 backgrounds. There are no cool Mode 7 effects, which really seems like a missed opportunity, given all the cool scaling effects that were present in Rondo, on a much less powerful system. And Bloodlines also just has much better visuals and layout as well, so of the 16-bit games, this one's sleeping, it's slouching. It's just not even trying. You cannot play as Maria in this game, so there will be no easy mode. In fact, it's much harder overall. It's built to be more of a challenge than Rondo. I would say it's probably the hardest of the 16-bit Castlevania games, which explains, I think, why a lot of people really do like it, because I know that a lot of Castlevania fans, they really like a good challenge, and this definitely provides that. Richter appears to have suffered some leg or knee injury. He kind of walks now like he's moving through clay a little bit. He's much slower than he is in Rondo. The item crashes are way less impressive. The Grand Cross is completely changed. It looks so rinky-dink now. You still have the vampire killer all the time, but you can't light it on fire anymore. And the biggest crime of all is that you fall right to the floor after jumping up to collect the orb, so You can't even do any really cool poses. Thus far, I've talked a lot about how this game is worse than Rondo, but there are a few ways in which it's actually a little bit better. First, the music is an absolute triumph. You wouldn't think the Super Nintendo could beat a CD-based system in the music department, but quite honestly, this soundtrack beats Rondo's hands down. Another huge improvement is the battle with Dracula. In Rondo, he's not too challenging, and the fight is really simple and very straightforward. Here, the Dracula battle takes place in a room with platforms of various heights. You can easily be knocked into the abyss with a single attack. It adds a lot more depth and complexity to the battle. I know I've had quite a few negative things to say about this game, and I want to stress here that I by no means think it's a bad game. While it's definitely the worst of these 16-bit Castlevania games, it's still very fun. I enjoyed playing it to make this video despite its being a weak imitation of Rondo. If, like me, you were a kid in the 90s with a Super Nintendo and this is the closest you could get to playing Rondo until years later, it's still pretty good. It may not be as good as Super Castlevania 4 or Bloodlines. I can't really see any Castlevania fan in 95 skipping it. Taking on its own, it's a middling Castlevania title. I would say the worst Castlevania to date, but even a bad Castlevania is still a pretty good game. So, thank you for watching, and until next time, game over.